I love cereal. Do we have any cereal fans out there? If you're watching with us live right now, I would encourage you, if you're a cereal fan, go in the comment section right now and share with everybody else who's online with us this morning what your favorite kind of cereal is. Or if you're watching later on YouTube, why don't you take a moment right now and in the comment section below, share with the whole world what your favorite kind of cereal is. Personally, I don't have a favorite, which is my dilemma. I actually have in our home, we have an entire cupboard section full of different kinds of cereal. I mean, I love it so much, and I can't even pick one. In fact, I can't even just eat one. When I make a bowl of cereal, I don't eat just one kind of cereal. I layer my cereal. I'll have 4 or 5 different kinds of cereal in my bowl at one time because I love cereal. It's simple. But what's amazing to me is how quickly something so simple can become so complex. I mean, I've had moments where I've been at the grocery store, and maybe you've had a similar experience. I've been at the grocery store and I've literally watched people in the cereal aisle staring at all the different kinds of cereal. I mean, they seemingly can't make a decision. Now, for me, the decision is simple. I want all of them, but I've watched people stare at all the cereal, not able to make a decision. For them, it's complicated. For some reason, it's complex. And we live with this tension in our world between the complex and the simple. I mean, on one hand, this one and only life that we live is complicated. It's complex. Well, on the other hand, what we want out of life is simple. And it's amazing to me how life has this ability to make the simple complex. And you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, you'd love to go outside today. You'd love to go to the movies. You'd love to go out to lunch after service this morning, but you know it's more complicated. It's more complex than that. And the more complex life becomes, the more complicated our situations, the more complicated our circumstances become, the more frustrated we become, the more agitated we become, the more annoyed, the more anxious we become. And for as unique and as individual as we all are, at the root of who we are, there are some simple things that we all share in common. We all have desires, we all have dreams, we all have goals, and those things that we all have, they're simple. I mean, the what might be different, but the desire for what is something that we all share. It's simple. I mean, you want to be a great man. You want to be a great woman. You'd like to be a great boyfriend, a girlfriend, a great spouse. You want to be a better parent. You want to be a great student. You want to be healthy. You want to be successful. I mean, what you want to be and what you want to have in your life is simple. It's simple to say, but you know that it's so much more than that. It's more complicated than life because life makes it complex. Things have happened, or things are happening, things change, or things are in the process of changing. And even though what we want out of life, and even though what we want to accomplish in life is simple and simple to say, it's so much more complicated than that. And we're not who or where we want to be in this life for a whole variety of different reasons. And to be honest, let's be honest, some of those reasons are our fault. There are decisions we made or decisions we didn't make, and we're who and where we are many times because of decisions, because of our own choosing. But other times, and on the other side of that coin, many times we find ourselves in situations where we're not who or where we want to be, and the reasons are completely out of our control. And so even though what we want out of life, and even though those things that we all share are simple to say, life makes them oftentimes more complicated. Things are more complex than just simply saying what we want to be in life. And so how we got here is complicated. And as if life wasn't complicated enough, as if the situations you're dealing with and the realities that you've been managing and navigating for most of your life, as if life wasn't complicated enough, you throw this present reality that we all find ourselves navigating, you throw that into the mix. I mean, life is just so complex. Life is just so complicated. So, how do we keep from losing sight of those simple things we want to do and become in life? How do we keep from not giving up on the pursuit of those things that we want to achieve or those things that we want to accomplish in our life? How do we keep from doing those? Because you felt it. I felt it. We've all experienced it. Where those things that are so simple to say, the things that we want to do, the type of people we want to be, the things we want to accomplish, we've all seen those things that are so simple to say get buried under the complexity of life. And so how do we do that? And again, as complicated and as complex as life can be, The reason many of us aren't who or where we want to be, I mean, if we were to boil down all the reasons and if we were to get past all the excuses, if we were just to kind of put them into one big pile, I mean, this happened or this didn't happen or that changed or this person didn't support me or I couldn't catch a break or I was never given the opportunity or I had to put up with him or I had to go home to her. I mean, if you were to take all the reasons and you were just to kind of throw them aside for one moment, I think the truth is the reason many of us, if not all of us to varying degrees, aren't who and where we want to be in life is for this reason. We allow our resolve to be controlled by our circumstances and by our emotions. Isn't that true? We allow our resolve to be controlled by our circumstances and our emotions. And the reason that this is so important for us to talk about today, the reason this is so important for us to unpack today is because if we're not careful, if you're not careful, if I'm not careful, we will allow our circumstances, we will allow this present reality, as complex and as complicated as it is, we will allow this and our emotional reactions to our circumstances to control us, to take control of our resolve, and we will lose sight and we will give up and not become the people that we want to be because we become so focused and our resolve becomes so controlled by what's happening to us, what's happening around us, and our emotional reactions to them. And parents, you know this is true, right? I mean, that's why you would do just about and say just about anything to keep our kids from making the same mistakes we made or falling into the same traps that we fell into, right? I mean, we'll say just about anything. Listen, don't give up, just hang in there, push through, come on, don't give up, don't quit, stick with it, stay with it. You'll regret it if you let go, you'll regret it if you give up. I mean, someday when you're my age, you wish you hadn't have quit. Why is it so easy to say in those moments? Because as a parent, we're driven by our minds, not their emotions. Now for our kids, I mean, for them, they're looking at what's happening to them. They look at what's happening around them, and they're emotionally reacting to those things. I mean, for them, it's complicated. For them, it's complex. For them, it's the end of the world, right? But as a parent, for us, it's simple. And we know that if we can't help them see that in the moment, that they'll give up. They'll give in, they'll walk away, they'll quit. And we know, you know, for your kids, that one day they'll trade the emotions they're currently feeling for other emotions down the road. So when we're not controlled by circumstances, when we're not controlled by emotions, we know that it's just a matter of simply pushing through the complex realities we find ourselves, no matter how complicated things get. We know that it's just simply a matter of pushing through those moments. We know that. In those moments, it's simple to say, but when you're the one dealing with the circumstance, when you're the one in that season of life, when you're the one that's navigating through the fog of all those emotions, it's a different story, right? A story that almost always ends in despair and regret. And I wish I could go back and I wish I could turn back time. And so, what do we do? What do we do in those moments? I mean, how do we stay focused? I mean, if only there was a way to alter the equation or flip the coin. If only there was a way to allow our resolve to be in control as opposed to our resolve being continually controlled by our circumstances and our emotional reactions to them. If only there was a way. If only there was a way to live with Simplexity. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that life is complicated. We can't just, pass by the fact that life gets complex at times, but at the same time, we can't allow the complexity of life to keep us from those things that we so desperately want to do and become the type of people that we want to be. And so for the remainder of our time together this morning, I want to share with you how we can discover clarity in the midst of the complexity of life. And to do that, what I want to do is take us into the pages of history and look into the life of a man who at 3 different times, specifically 3 different times in his life, he could have become crippled by the complicated. He could have just been caught up by the complications that he found himself in and his emotional reactions to them. And he could have used every excuse in the book that you and I often make for why we don't become the people that we want to be. He could have done all of that, but instead of being like many of us, he allowed his resolve to be in control. And he was not controlled by pain. He was not controlled by circumstances. He was not controlled by his emotional reactions to what was happening to him and happening around him. In fact, when you get to the end of his story, you see that he gets what he wants, he gets the girl he wants, and his life and the lives of generations that would follow him are changed forever. So this morning I want to look at his story, and we're going to start in the book of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and we're going to start at the beginning in Genesis, specifically Genesis chapter 25, and we're going to flip all the way up to chapter 32. And we're going to look at all these different moments in his life. But before we jump in, I want to give you a little bit of his backstory for where we're going to pick up in the text. So when we get to Genesis, we find that there was a man named Isaac, and he had his wife named Rebekah, and they had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Now, Jacob being the oldest, he was the rightful heir to the birthright. Now, these two brothers are completely different. Esau is more of an outdoorsy type, where Jacob is more of a homebody. And these two brothers are going along. And again, Esau is the oldest, so he is rightfully the recipient of all that would come his way as a result of being the oldest. He had the birthright. But what we're going to see in just a moment is that right alone isn't enough to secure one's future. It's not just enough to have the right. And so we're going to pick it up. And it says, one day when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of this red stew." And this is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. "All right," Jacob replied, "but first trade me your rights as the firstborn son." And so one son is out hunting while the other son is home cooking. And Jacob knows his brother very well, and in this moment he knows him so well, and he knows kind of how to kind of work with Esau. He knows how to kind of pick at Esau. And so he gives Esau this proposal. And when you read it, it's an outrageous proposal. I mean, it's the kind of thing that just makes absolutely no sense, as if he's going to go for that. But what Jacob knows, and what's really happening in this moment, is Jacob is showing that he is fully aware of what he wants and what he values. He's showing that he knows what he perceives his brother wants and values, and he's looking to take advantage of this tremendous gap between the two of these things. And these two brothers are as completely different as people who accomplish and achieve their hopes and dreams in life and the people who don't. Okay, these brothers are so completely different. Here's what it says. Look, I'm dying of starvation. I mean, listen to what it sounds like when you live in the moment. I'm dying of starvation. Like, you're just so dramatic. That's what Esau said. What good is my birthright to me now? And Jacob is hearing his brother say in this moment what many of us are feeling, many of us are saying, or maybe what people are hearing out there today. Like, what's the point about thinking about tomorrow in the midst of what's happening today? Like, what's the point about thinking long-term in life? I'm so focused. I'm hungry right now. Like, I'm so connected to what's happening. I'm so connected to what I'm feeling right now that I can't think clearly enough to see how valuable my tomorrow is. Now, Jacob can see it, but his brother can't. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? Have you ever been so connected to your present reality that you can't step away or stand aside from it long enough to see how giving up or giving in would impact your tomorrow? Does that sound familiar? But Jacob said, first, you must swear that your birthright is mine. And so Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn son to his brother Jacob. He gave up his entire future for a bowl of stew. Now that's not how the story ends. The story goes on. In fact, Jacob wants to continue on in his pursuit of his father's blessing, and he takes some pretty sly measures to ensure that he gets it. I mean, with the help of his mother, he deceives his father, and he ends up getting the blessing that he so desperately wanted. But shortly thereafter, he takes off and he leaves home because after he's, screwed his brother over a couple of times, he's scared that his brother is going to come after him and try to kill him. And so Jacob heads east and he eventually gets to a place called Paddan Aram. And when he gets there, through a couple of odd circumstances, he ends up staying with his uncle whose name is Laban. And Laban has two daughters, Leah and Rachel. And as you read this story for yourself, which I would always encourage you to do, you read this story yourself, you'll see that it's Rachel who is the daughter that gets Jacob's attention. I mean, she's beautiful, But the Bible describes these two sisters as, the Bible describes them as polar opposites, if you get my drift, So Rachel is beautiful, you can do the math on the rest. Now, eventually, Laban comes to Jacob. He's been there for about a month, and Laban comes to Jacob and he says, listen, you shouldn't work for me for free just because we're related. So why don't you stay here? But tell me, what would I need to pay you? What would it cost for me to keep you here and working for me? Now, Jacob immediately knows what he wants, right? And better yet, he knows who he wants. For him, it's simple. Rachel. He wants Rachel. Agreed, Laban replied. I'd rather give her to you than to anyone else. Stay and work for me. So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel. But his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. 7 years. Can you imagine working and waiting for 7 years to get what you want? Can you imagine waiting for 7 years to get who you want? 7 years before things changed? 7 years before you got some sort of direction in and for your life? Can you imagine waiting 7 years to get the answer that you're searching for? Can you imagine 7 years before you lose the weight? 7 years before your marriage gets better, 7 years before your kids behave, 7 years before you find someone, 7 years before you can leave the house. I mean, most of us aren't going to make it, we don't think, another 7 days, right? But for Jacob, 7 years seemed like 7 days. How? Well, we're going to find out in just a minute, but not before the twist. You see, after the 7 years, Jacob eventually marries the wrong girl, okay? He marries Leah. He's deceived by his uncle Laban, and he marries the wrong girl. And I would encourage you to read this for yourself. And for those of you that think the Bible is boring, I mean, this is Netflix binge-worthy type stuff here. I'm telling you, you got to read through Jacob's story for yourself. It's an incredible thing. But Jacob eventually realizes, okay, what happened, and things aren't what he thought they were. And again, you got to read this for yourself. It's kind of hilarious. But he goes to Laban. He says, look, what's going on? What gives? And Laban says, look, it's customary for the oldest daughter to be married first. And so if it's Rachel you want, and I get it, right? If it's Rachel you really want, you're going to have to commit, get this, for another 7 years. What? Are you kidding me? This is incredibly unfair. This isn't right. I mean, this is the moment where all the justifications and all the reasons that you just cut bait and leave, I mean, this is the time, right? This is where all the excuses that could be made, for taking your lumps and moving on, they're justified, they're valid in this moment. But Jacob doesn't use any of them. Why? Well, it's not because he's like his brother. The reason that Jacob doesn't use any of the excuses that he could have very easily made is because of this. Jacob is not governed by his circumstances or his emotional response to them. I mean, you would be, I would be. I mean, you gotta admit, okay, Jacob in this moment has got to be furious. I mean, he's got to be just shaking his head. He's got to be wanting, like, Laban, I'm going to take you back and I'm going to beat you down. I mean, you have swindled me. You have deceived me. He's got to be frustrated. He's got to be angry. He's got to just be so enraged. But at the same time, even though he feels those things, and even though those things are happening to him and happening around him, he is not focused or driven by those things. It's his resolve that governs Jacob in this moment. And it's what got him the birthright and the blessing, and it's what gets him who he wants in Rachel. Now, the story goes on, and again, I would encourage you to read this for yourself, but when we get to chapter 32, the complexity and the drama continues to follow Jacob. I mean, it has his whole life, and it continues to follow him. And when we get to chapter 32, we find that Jacob is on the verge of being face to face with his brother Esau for the first time since he left home. But he has no idea how Esau is feeling towards him. He has no idea what he's going to do or how he's going to react. And so he has no idea what to do in this moment. And so he sends a message along with some gifts to his brother. He sends him off in advance as a way of kind of feeling out the situation. And then he sends all of his family, he sends his possessions on ahead, and he stays back by himself in his camp alone for the night. And this is where we get another glimpse into the resolve of Jacob. Here's what it says. This left Jacob, meaning him leaving, sending off his family and sending off his possessions and all these things in advance. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. Now, the man is God, which is an encouraging and powerful reality in and of itself. I mean, in this moment, we see that God is willing to be so close to his people, that God is willing to wrestle with his people, that God's willing to wrestle with you and willing to wrestle with me. And these two wrestle all through the night. And they go back and forth, but at the same time, which is weird, they go back and forth in this wrestling match, but this is God we're talking about, right? I mean, you'd think that God could just, be done with him whenever he wanted to, right? Not necessarily. When the man saw that he would not win the match, when the man saw that Jacob was so determined that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and he wrenched it out of its socket. Okay, so the two are wrestling, and God's like, man, I've had enough of this. This guy is he's determined. He's not going to give up. He's not a quitter. And so he pulls the God card, right? It's kind of like rock, paper, scissors, God, right? He pulls the God card and he pulls the wily veteran move. And in this moment, Jacob has got to be like in excruciating pain. Like he's got to be so exhausted. God himself wants this to be over. And when the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob, get this, Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And this makes me think of when I'm wrestling with my son Parker. He loves to wrestle. He's just a little kid, but he loves to wrestle with me, and we have a lot of fun doing that. And my guess is dads out there, you're having kind of similar moments with your kids, right? You're wrestling with them, you're playing with them, and you kind of get tired, you kind of get bored, but they keep coming at you, right? So you do that thing to kind of throw them off or to distract them or get them focused on something else, right? And usually it works, but not in this moment. Jacob is persistent. He's relentless. He's not going anywhere. He's in pain. He's not focused on that. He's not focused on what's happening to him. He's not focused on what's happening around him. He's not focused on how exhausted he is. He's saying, I will not let you go, God. I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. I'm not a quitter. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give in. I know what I want. I know what I want in this moment. I'm going to see this through. I'm not going anywhere. You're not going to get rid of me. I'm going to keep coming at you. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how I feel about in this moment. I'm not giving up. I know what I want. And I'm not going anywhere until I get it. And he does. And he does. Jacob's ability to be driven, be governed by his resolve, gets him what he wanted, the girl he wanted, and his life, and as we're about to see in a few moments, the lives of generations to follow are changed forever. Watch what happens. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on, you will be called Israel. Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. Please tell me your name, Jacob said. Why do you want to know my name? The man replied. And then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared. The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. And so when you look into the scriptures, when you look into history, when you look into the life of Jacob, you see a man who was governed by his resolve, not his circumstances or not by his emotions. You see a man who felt what we probably feel. He felt what we would have felt had we not gone through the similar situations. He felt the way we feel. He thought things that we think. He went through unbelievable circumstances. He went through some pretty complex situations, but he would not be controlled by what happened to him, what happened around him, or how he felt about all of those things. He knew what he wanted to be, and he knew who he wanted to be with, and he was not going to quit until he got it. He would become who and what he wanted to be. What about you? That's Jacob's story, but what about your story? Who do you see when you look in the mirror? Do you see the person that you're en route to becoming, or do you see the reflection of who you could have been? Are you constantly controlled by your circumstances and by your emotional reactions to what happens to you and what happens around you? Because if you are, you will never have a constant to cling to. And you know this, circumstances and emotions are always changing. And so if you're governed by those things, if you're constantly being controlled by those things, you will never have a constant in your life. to cling to. And you know, our world is changing daily. The situations around us are becoming more and more complicated, more and more complex. But the truth is, like other seasons and like other circumstances we've all been through in our lives, this too shall pass. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't necessarily know how that's going to happen, but I do know that eventually this present reality, COVID-19, will one day be a story we tell. And in the midst of this circumstance, and in the midst of circumstances that will come our way months and years from now, the question that we should be asking is not, when will this be over? The question we should be asking is not, when will this be over? I know it's a question you're asking. I know it's a question I've asked, and not just of our present reality, but in other circumstances in life, we've all asked the question, when will this be over? But to some questions in life, there are no answers. There are only better questions. And so the question I would encourage you to ask, the question I'm continually asking of myself in the midst of our current circumstance, in the midst of the complexity we find ourselves in right now in this season of our lives, the question I would encourage you to ask, and the question I'm going to try to continually ask myself is not when will this be over? The question to ask is, who will I be when this is over? That's the question. That's the question that I would encourage you to ask. Not when will this be over? Who will I be when this is over? And what am I going to do today to ensure when that time comes, whenever that is, that I will actually be the person that I would so simply say I want to be? Because you've been given an incredible moment in history. You've been given an incredible moment in history. You know, an opportunity for self-reflection in the midst of social distancing. And when this is all over, when you walk out the door of your house, when all of this is over, you have the opportunity to be a different person than you were when all of this started. So who are you going to be when this is over? And what are you going to do today to ensure that you actually are that person when that time comes? And like you, we as a church have been given an incredible moment in history. The opportunity for organizational reflection in the midst of social distancing. And when we walk through the doors of our church together, when all of this is over, we have the opportunity to be a different church than we were when all of this started. And so the question I'm asking, and the question I'm asking our leadership to ask is, who do we want to be when that time comes? What kind of church do we want to be? And what are we going to do today to ensure that we are that church when that time comes? I mean, we can't change the past. We can't change the past, right? I mean, we can accept it. That's not to excuse it, but that's what helps us move away from it. And what we can do, what you can do, what I can do is change tomorrow. And we do that by choosing today that my resolve, your resolve, my resolve is what is going to guide me and drive me in the midst of the ever-changing, complex reality that I find myself in. I'm not going to be driven and focused on what happens to me and around me or how I'm emotionally reacting. I'm going to focus on who and what I want to be. That my resolve will control me. And I will keep focused on those things that I would so simply say I want to have and be in my life. That I will be guided by who I am and who I'm becoming.